Police have confirmed reports that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been arrested at the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
We begin with breaking news from the UK. Britain has approved the extradition of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to the United States.
Hello there. Of all the public figures alive today, who would you like to still be remembered in 400 years' time? Now that is a lot of time. Most of us will be completely forgotten by then. But who do you think will be remembered? Most of our politicians will, I think, be a footnote at best. Bolton, Bolsonaro, Pompeo, Netanyahu. They'll be dust on the boots of Father Time. But a journalist like the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, I'm certain that he will be remembered. Look, and here's why. We live in the digital age. And in this age, our age, he's been the one who, using the internet and his computing skills, challenged the status quo by encouraging whistleblowers like Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning to come forward to expose the crimes committed by our deeply corrupt governments. I mean, that was a very brave and courageous thing to do. How do we thank him? By allowing them to lock him up in Belmarsh, a level A prison full of serial killers and rapists and terrorists. Right now, Assange is battling extradition to the US by appealing to the European Court of Human Rights. But it seems like England, little England, is going to feed him to the neocon beast. I mean, he's truly a hero, a tragic hero. His life has all the right ingredients for him to be remembered in 400 years' time. Now, it might be useful to reverse my question. Who alive 400 years ago do we still remember today? If I go out on the street and ask a random Dutchman, he will say Rembrandt, of course, William of Orange, Michiel de Ruiter. But one name that will also definitely come up a lot is this chap, Johann van Oldenbarnevelt. He was a revolutionary and a statesman who served as the Land's advocate, the de facto prime minister of the Dutch Republic. He was responsible for shaping the Dutch Republic into a sovereign nation, and he gave it the tools to flourish. He enabled trade deals. He founded the Dutch East Indies Company, the VOC, which not everyone might like, but he was hugely important. Now, in many ways, Martin Luther, whom we discussed last week, he makes for a better historical comparison, I think, with Julian Assange. I mean, Assange seeking refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy was just like Martin Luther going up to Wartburg Castle disguised as Junker Jörg. But that's not the point. I showed you the footage at the beginning of this video of Assange being dragged out of the embassy because I wanted you to feel the same deep, visceral emotion, the indignance and outrage that many Dutch people felt when, in 1618, Oldenbarnevelt, their most prominent politician, was arrested. He was arrested illegally, without a proper warrant, not by the Spanish monarch, but by Maurice, Prince of Orange, the son of William, his ally. This rascal here. By the way, if you want to buy this engraving, you can go to my website and you'll find it there. Link down below. The cousin of Maurice's grandfather was a fellow called Johann Friedrich the Magnanimous. You might remember him. All these stories are very interwoven. Maurice and Oldenbarnevelt worked together hand in glove for many years, leading the country through a tough time when its independence was precarious. Oldenbarnevelt led the negotiations with the Spanish crown, which resulted in the 12 Years' Truce in 1609. As historian Peter Gell noted, the truce marked an astonishing victory for the Dutch. Maurice, however, wanted to seize more spoils of war. Other disagreements came to the fore as well. Oldenbarnevelt wanted the states, the parliaments of the provinces, to be sovereign, whereas Maurice wanted to centralize power and establish himself as the undisputed ruler. Oldenbarnevelt believed in freedom of conscience, or freedom of thought, and religious tolerance. For this reason, he supported the so-called Arminians, or Remonstrants, a religious group which expressed a wish to moderate the strict doctrines of Calvinism, in particular its views on predestination, which was not compatible with human free will. By all accounts, Maurice wasn't a particularly religious man. He was more interested in training armies and fighting in wars, that kind of thing, but he made the strategic decision to back the Calvinist hardliners. While Oldenbarnevelt was running the country, the Prince of Orange was secretly plotting his downfall. In 1618, the Synod of Dort was called, an assembly which rejected the objections of the Remonstrants. As their protector, Oldenbarnevelt and various others, Hugo de Groot, Rombout Hogebeets, were rounded up and thrown in jail. During the period of inquest, Oldenbarnevelt was neither allowed to consult papers nor put his defence in writing. A show trial followed in which a special court of 24 judges, only half of whom were Hollanders and nearly all of whom were personal enemies of Oldenbarnevelt, conveniently found him guilty of treason. Attempts to obtain a pardon were made by the French ambassador and Maurice's stepmother, Louise de Coligny, but it was all in vain. At the age of 71, the elderly statesman who, as a soldier, as a legal expert, as a statesman, had given his life for his country, was executed. Oldenbarnevelt was beheaded. The leader of the Remonstrants, Jan uit den Boogaard, fled, unsurprisingly, first to Rotterdam and then down to Antwerp. All his goods were confiscated, and he was officially banned from ever returning to his country again. The reason given being that he had introduced new ideas, which is of course always very scary. Indeed, anyone who did not align themselves completely with accepted Reformed theology got cancelled. Similar to today's culture of conformity, it was often the brightest and the most intellectually curious who were affected the most. For example, the pastor Simon Goulart, who was born in Geneva but who practiced in Amsterdam, was suspended from his job because he was alleged to have entertained Remonstrant sympathies. In response, this theologian decided to fight back by becoming, wait for it, an artist. He designed and engraved a print in which he poked fun at the totalitarian Calvinists that had persecuted him. In his engraving, he is given the participants of the Synod of Dort devil horns. Two little demons whisper sweet nothings in the ear of the president of the Synod, Johannes Bogerman. Incidentally, when I type in his surname on Google, Bogerman fittingly autocorrects to Bogeyman. It's the first known image that satirizes the Synod. The director of the Haarlem Latin School, my ancestor Theodor Schrevelius, was also dismissed for his Remonstrant ideas and had to flee to Leiden. His colleague, the classical philologist and writer Petrus Schrevelius, also brought down the displeasure of the government on him because he had published a series of verses in honor of the Remonstrant Leiden pensionary Rombout Hogebeets. He was fined 200 guilders for this. That was a hefty fine, and he had to sell off part of his library. But Schrevelius didn't lose his wit or spirit. No. In 1621, he commissioned a young prodigy, an artist called Cornelis Saftleven, who was about 14 years old at that time, to paint a satire of the Synod of Dort. Now, the painting has not survived, but an original preparatory drawing has. The president of the Synod, Johannes Bogerman, is represented as a cock who's crowing "Pescucci" or persecution. The owls around the book represent various other participants of the Synod. The calf's head on the wall is a portrait of John Calvin. The schout or mayor of Dort, Hugo Muis van Hody, is represented as the pussycat on the windowsill. Screverius, and Saftleven for that matter, was taking a risk with his commission. It was only a couple of years after the Synod, and Prince Maurice was still very much alive and in power. It was a dangerous choice for a Remonstrant. Screverius did well to choose the young Cornelis Saftleven, though, because he came from a Remonstrant dynasty of painters. In this fantastic self-portrait, he's depicted himself making music together with his brother, Herman, himself a first-rate painter of landscapes with whom he sometimes collaborated. Although primarily active in Rotterdam, Saftleven spent a couple of formative years in Antwerp. There he got in touch with the great Flemish artist and diplomat Peter Paul Rubens, who owned many of his paintings. They even appear to have collaborated, as Rubens is known to have added figures, or what we call staffage, to some of his paintings. Another great Flemish artist, Anthony van Dyck, drew a portrait of Saftleven, which was turned into an engraving by Lucas Forsterman. There was also an exchange of ideas with David Teniers the Younger, the later founder of the Antwerp Academy. Saftleven worked in a great variety of genres, but in the paintings discussed here, you'll find the influences of Hieronymus Bosch, known for his macabre and nightmarish depictions of hell, his successor Peter Bruegel the Elder, and Roland Chavarit, a mannerist painter of animals. One of the subjects that Saftleven kept returning to was the temptation of Saint Anthony. Saint Anthony is on his pilgrimage, and in the Egyptian desert he gets ambushed by all kinds of supernatural beings. He's getting harassed by demons and seduced by women who are trying to lead him astray. This subject allowed Saftleven to indulge his fancy by painting weird and unnatural creatures. Saftleven also used allegories to expose social wrongdoing. In a satire on the litigious farmers, he replaced people with animals to mock those farmers who are easily persuaded by greedy lawyers to take legal action for the slightest complaint. Behind the lawyer hangs a warning which loosely translates to, "Fighting over a cow will cost you at least another." Many of his allegories are coded representations filled with deliciously dark humor of the historic events that were unfolding at the time. In 1629, when a Dutch and English army captured the city of Den Bosch, which had been part of the Spanish Netherlands, Saftleven painted this satire on the expulsion of the Roman Catholic clergy from that city. It was an enormous blow to the prestige of the Spanish monarchy, so it's a scene that a patriotic art collector would have loved to acquire. Saftleven represents the bishop as an elephant, and the ears have been folded to make them look like a mitre. He's being pushed by a pig with a bell around his neck. He represents the brothers of the Order of St. Anthony, who is usually depicted with a pig next to him. On the left there is a little devilish orchestra, providing some musical entertainment. Especially in his early years, Saftleven produced the most wondrous allegorical animal scenes. I invite you to sit back for a minute and savour their sheer visual beauty and originality. Enjoy. In 1625, Joost van den Vondel, a poet and playwright who is sort of our Shakespeare, published the play Palamedes oft vermoorde onnozelheid. Although on a superficial level this play is about Odysseus' frame-up of Palamedes during the Trojan War, it was in fact a thinly veiled fictionalization of the trial of van Oldenbarnevelt. And of course, everyone saw straight through this. The play was censored and Van den Vondel was heavily fined. Almost 40 years later, in 1663, the play was put on after all. The play proved widely popular and went through 7 editions. With the public interest in the trial revived, Saftleven took up his brush and gave us a haunting, beautiful, charming painting, the Satire on the trial of Johan van Oldenbarnevelt, which is located in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. A lifelong dedication to painting allegories that arguably started with a preparatory drawing commissioned by Petrus Scriverius, culminated in this. This kangaroo court is filled with animals, each representing one of the 24 judges who sent the land's advocate to his death. Most of them seem ready to put their sharp teeth literally into the elderly statesman. Towering above them all is an elephant with a crown, who represents Nicolaas Kromhout, the president of the court of Holland. Saftleven makes his trunk point to the right, so that our gaze is guided to an essential detail. A piece of paper with a text reading Trucidata Innocentia, or Murdered Innocence, which was not coincidentally the subtitle of Vondel's play. In other words, the defendant is innocent of the charges he's been found guilty of. Over time, de vermoorde onschuldsspeler has evolved into a Dutch idiom meaning playing innocent, being hypocritical and not owing up to one's faults, so it might as well now refer to the judges who were, after all, merely doing their duty and passing a judgment they thought fair. The proud and greedy mayor of Amsterdam, Reinier Pauw, has a surname which literally means peacock, so Saftleven didn't need to think twice about what his spirit animal was. In many ways, Pauw was the Donald Trump of his time. In 1628, he attempted a buffoonish but violent coup d'etat in Amsterdam by pitting the schutterij, the militia, against the liberal mayors. Needless to say, he was not appointed mayor of Amsterdam ever again. As representatives of the province of Gelderland, Nicolaas de Voogd and Henrik van Essen held the most senior positions, and so they were portrayed as lions. Hugo Muis van Holy is a tiger this time, comparable to the pussycat on the preparatory drawing. I suppose he wouldn't have been particularly menacing as a mouse, which is what his name actually means in Dutch. The bloodthirsty Muis van Holy was such a hated figure that hardly anyone could be moved to attend his burial. They said there was no use to putting the coffin in the earth, because the corpse wasn't there anymore. It had already been taken to hell by Satan. And thus every judge has been ascribed an animal, usually because their personalities or occupations fit the animals in question. Gerard Beukels van Santen is the crocodile, Pieter Janszoon Schagen is the mule, playing the violin with bagpipes and a music book. Albrecht Bruining is the dog. Adriaan Ploos is the monkey with a weather vane. Now I haven't seen this noted before, but the elephant Kromhout clearly decides which way the wind blows. He only has to blow his trunk and it changes. It emphasizes the unpredictability of Oldenbarnevelt's fate, what with judges so unreliable and mercurial. Volkert Sloot is the billy goat, and so it goes on. It's just a beastly bunch. Even amidst all these gruesome animals, Oldenbarnevelt seems quite calm and dignified. I was actually never quite sure what was happening in the background of the painting until I stumbled upon this letter, which provides us with a key to understanding the meaning behind the scene. So, in the background, we see the gates of hell. There are devils hurrying about with stones. There are devils standing guard by the gate. They look a bit nervous. In fact, they're scared stiff. Why? Why is that? The 24 judges are so vile, are so immoral, that the devils are afraid that they will come to hell, chase them out, and take their jobs from them. They're trying to build a wall to try to keep these shady figures out. It's extraordinary. It says in the letter that they fear these judges will make hell a whole lot worse. They'll ruin the experience. When even Satan doesn't want to have anything to do with you, that's bad. That's not good. Now, we shouldn't take any of this for granted. It's quite special that we can look at this painting and decipher its message. Remonstrants were attacked. They were imprisoned and killed for what they believed in. Any critique of the ruling ideology, it had to be underground. It had to be disguised. These were dissident images. Last week we discussed the Weimar altarpiece by Lucas Cranach. It's a huge artwork in a public space, a church, and as many people as possible were supposed to see it and be reassured of the legitimacy of Martin Luther's doctrine of justification by faith alone. This painting, on the other hand, is relatively small. It measures some 63 by 86 centimeters. That's roughly 25 by 34 inches. And it was destined to be seen only by a small audience. Images, like this, paintings like this could get you in real trouble when the message could be decoded. Of course, Saftleven took some precautionary measures. He had the judges depicted as beasts, which made them only partly recognizable, although here does look like the usual self. But there's something else you must know about this painting. There's a part of it which you haven't seen yet. You may have noticed that the elderly gentleman doesn't actually look all that much like Oldenbarnevelt. On the painting, you could fix a small medallion, also painted by Saftleven, which shows the admittedly rather youngish but very recognizable face of Oldenbarnevelt. In other words, the painting could not always be exhibited in its complete state. Only in the company of dear and trusted friends would the owner of the painting reveal the true meaning behind the picture. Only the initiated were given the key to decipher it. And now you too have the key. I just love this remnant of the now largely forgotten underground Remonstrant subculture. It's a brilliant condemnation of all careerists, frauds, and slavish sycophants who gladly send an innocent man, a great man, to his death. We can't go back in time and rescue Johann von Oldenbarnevelt. His fate is fixed in time. That injustice will always be there. But we can put a stop to injustices that are happening right now. There are various petitions that call for Julian Assange to be released. The least we can do is to sign these. You'll find the links down below. You know what to do. Next week, we'll discuss a different artwork, one of the most beautiful Virgin and Child paintings ever made. It is gorgeous, but a recent discovery revealed that the Virgin Mary in this painting is not breastfeeding baby Jesus. Oh no, she's breastfeeding someone else.